The story of Esther, the queen who saved her people. The ancient Persian kingdom was a realm of luxury and power. King Artaxerxes was great and cruel, and his capital was adorned with magnificent palaces and lavish feasts. One such feast, which lasted for 180 days, culminated in a request for Queen Vashti to appear before the guests. She refused, which enraged the king. He stripped her of her throne, and thus began the search for a new queen. Many young women from across the empire were gathered in the royal palace, but among them was one whose name became known to all: Esther. She was of Jewish descent, but concealed her heritage, as her guardian was her cousin Mordecai. He advised her to keep her lineage a secret. Esther won the king's favor, and he made her his new queen. One day Mordecai overheard a conspiracy at the palace gates between two guards who plotted to assassinate the king. Mordecai immediately informed Esther, who relayed the information to the king. The traitors were executed, and Mordecai's deed was recorded in the annals. However, there was another man in Persia whose name would forever be remembered: Haman. He was the king's chief advisor, and by royal decree everyone was required to bow to him. But Mordecai refused, unwilling to show respect to this arrogant man. Haman was furious and decided to take revenge not only on Mordecai, but on all the Jews. He convinced the king to sign an edict for the complete destruction of the Jews across the empire, promising a large sum of silver in exchange. When Mordecai learned of the terrible decree, he was despairing. He tore his clothes and covered his head with ashes, pleading with Esther to intervene. But she knew this might cost her life. She had only one weapon: her courage. She called upon all the Jews to pray and fast for 3 days, then boldly approached the king. Despite the risk, no one could enter the king's presence without an invitation. Esther made the daring decision. Seeing her resolve, King Artaxerxes, out of kindness, extended his golden scepter to grant her an audience. Esther did not immediately reveal her request. Instead, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet. Soon after, she repeated the invitation. The king asked her what she desired, and then she openly told him of the conspiracy, revealing that her people were in danger. Enraged, Artaxerxes demanded to know who dared to plot against his people. Upon discovering the truth, the king immediately condemned Haman. He was hanged on the very gallows Haman had prepared for Mordecai. However, the threat to the Jews was not yet over. The decree had already been signed, and it could not be revoked. So King Artaxerxes issued a new decree. The Jews were allowed to defend their lives and families. On the day the decree was proclaimed, the Jews, with the king's help, defeated their enemies. In Susa, at Esther's request, the battle continued for 2 more days, during which 75,000 of their enemies were destroyed. Since then, the Jews have celebrated Purim, a festival of salvation that followed great suffering. On this day, people rejoice and give thanks for the salvation of their people. Esther became a symbol of courage for all. From an ordinary girl, she became a queen who risked her life for her people. Her bravery and determination proved that faith in God and perseverance can overcome evil. Esther showed that even in the darkest times, when it seems all is lost, one person can change the course of history. Her choices and actions changed the fate of not only her people, but of the entire world. Ancient Persia was one of the most powerful empires of its time. Under the rule of King Artaxerxes I, the great city of Susa prospered, and the empire stretched from India to Egypt. The king's throne was a symbol of absolute power, and all were at his beck and call. Mighty rulers, noblemen, and generals all lived under the shadow of the greatness of this empire. In Susa, the capital of Persia, the royal court was the center of the universe. Servants and guards were always ready to carry out any command, and no corner of the magnificent palaces was without its adornments of precious stones, gilded patterns, and silk carpets. King Artaxerxes himself was a man whose will was unquestionable. His word was law, and no one dared defy his authority. But one day, during a grand feast that had already lasted almost half a year, Artaxerxes made a decision that led to a great crisis in his life and the lives of many others. The king held an opulent feast in honor of his power and wealth. To celebrate his great reign, ambassadors and rulers from all corners of the empire arrived. Everything was lavish: exquisite food, fine clothing, precious drinks. The feast lasted several months. This event was not just a banquet, it was an affirmation of the king's supreme power over the world. Among the guests, the crown jewel of these festivities was Queen Vashti, beautiful and proud, the king's wife. But she was not prepared to comply with one of the king's last demands. During one of the feasts, when Artaxerxes wished to display his wife before the guests, his command was clear. Queen Vashti was to appear in her royal robes and showcase her beauty. The king wanted to take pride in her, and in his view, this moment symbolized his greatness. However, Vashti refused. She considered it an insult. Her response was not merely a refusal, it was an act of bravery. It meant not only defying the king's command, but also challenging his authority. She was not willing to be just an ornament in his empire. This decision put her position on the throne at risk. The king was stunned. His anger knew no bounds, and at that moment, he made a decision that would forever change his life and the fate of an entire people. In his rage at his wife's refusal, he stripped her of her title and decreed that she would never again appear in his presence. Soon an announcement was made that the throne was vacant, and Queen Vashti was deposed. The king, without considering the consequences of his decision, began searching for a new queen to take her place. And it was in this context that something extraordinary happened, leading to the meeting of two incredible destinies. Esther, whose real name was Hadassah, was born in a small Jewish settlement far from the capital of Persia. She was an orphan, as her parents died when she was very young. Left without parents, Esther was taken in by her cousin Mordecai, a pious and wise man who provided her not only with an education, but also with love and care. His home became her refuge, and he always sought to protect her from harm. Mordecai was a man who knew his history and culture. He taught Esther religious truths and instructed her to preserve her Jewish identity, even though they lived in Persia, where Jews were in exile. However, he also knew how important it was to keep their heritage secret. He strongly advised Esther to conceal her Jewish origins. In those times, as in any other, it was dangerous to reveal one's connection to a people who were not favored by the rulers. When the great search for a new queen began, with the beauty and charm of the women being the most important qualities, Esther, like other young women, was selected to participate. This was a chance that seemed like it could change her life forever. She was chosen to be a candidate for the role of Queen of Persia. Though Esther was beautiful and young, she behaved with modesty and restraint, and her beauty lay not only in her appearance, but also in her inner strength. She was a woman who, despite all the trials and hardships, maintained her faith and dignity. Before she went to the palace, Mordecai gave her a final piece of advice. Do not reveal your nationality, and do not say that you are Jewish. Remember who you are, but keep it secret to avoid hatred. These words became her guiding star in the palace. Each girl entering the harem underwent a year-long preparation. This was a time to perfect their beauty, improve manners, learn languages, and familiarize themselves with the royal court's culture. Esther, despite being a modest girl, quickly won the favor of the palace servants, and later that of the king himself. When her turn came, and she stood before King Artaxerxes, her beauty did not go unnoticed. The king was captivated by her grace, her modesty, and the inner light she radiated. Unlike the other women, who tried to attract his attention with flashy clothing and bold manners, Esther was not intrusive. Her tenderness and wisdom won the king over, and without hesitation, he placed the crown on her head, making her his new queen. Although Esther had become queen, she continued to conceal her Jewish identity, as Mordecai had advised her. She did not reveal her origins, hoping that when the right moment came, she would be able to help her people without exposing herself. Meanwhile, events at the palace set the stage for further struggles. Among the king's closest advisors was a man named Haman the Agagite. This man was ambitious, cruel, and sought to rise as high as possible in Persia. And he succeeded. He became the second most powerful man in the empire, which gave him not only power, but enormous opportunities. All the king's servants were required to show him respect. He expected everyone to bow down before him, but Mordecai, Esther's cousin, refused. He did not bow to anyone except his God. This enraged Haman, and he decided to take revenge. He not only sought to punish Mordecai, but also planned to annihilate all Jews in the empire. He convinced the king that the Jews were a danger to the kingdom, and that they should be destroyed. Haman's plan was set in motion. A decree was issued across the empire to destroy all Jews in the kingdom, and the date was set. The royal seal was placed on the decree, and it seemed as though nothing could prevent the massacre. Mordecai, upon learning of the king's decree, rent his clothes in grief. He knew that this was a death sentence for his people. Desperate, he sent a message to Esther, asking her to speak to the king and save the Jews. But Esther was afraid. She knew that anyone who entered the king's presence uninvited risked death. The law was strict. If the king did not extend his golden scepter to the person, they were executed. But Esther was the only one who could change the situation. After much deliberation, Esther decided to act. She called on the Jews to fast and pray for 3 days, and then, risking her life, she approached the king. When he saw her, Artaxerxes extended the scepter, and she was allowed to speak. In a surprising twist, Esther invited the king and Haman to a banquet. After the first feast, she invited them again. At the second banquet, she revealed her true identity and made a bold request. She told the king that she was Jewish, and if he spared her life, she would be forever grateful. Then she revealed the plot against her people and the terrible decree. Enraged, Artaxerxes demanded Haman's execution, and the decree was reversed. The Jews were allowed to defend themselves, and their enemies were defeated. The victory became the foundation for the Purim festival, celebrated by Jews to this day. Esther's bravery, faith, and wisdom saved her people. She became one of the great heroines in Jewish history, and her name is remembered with respect and gratitude.